Before we get started with today's video, I wanted to mention that this video topic was actually voted on by my supporters over at Patreon. If you want to get some extra perks like voting on video topics, seeing some videos early, and getting a ton of behind the scenes looks and sneak peeks at my Pokemon Cardinal project, and even more, all while making a huge difference and supporting the channel at the same time, you can go check out my Patreon with the card that should be popping up on screen, or the link in the description, and thank you to all of those who are currently supporting me. It means the absolute world. With that said though, do you ever feel like some Pokemon just aren't the type that they should be? It's a pretty common occurrence from generation to generation where some Pokemon will debut and their type just doesn't make any sense. I've talked before on the channel about explaining those kinds of situations and showing how even though some Pokemon's typings are kind of weird, they do make sense once you get into the origins of the Pokemon themselves. With that said though, there are still some Pokemon past that definitely should have some kind of type that they don't, and that's what this video is all about. Now, I want to be clear before we get started that I'm not saying that these Pokemon are typed wrong or Game Freak didn't do their job correctly. At the end of the day, every single Pokemon has some kind of reason for being the type that they are, and this is more so just a fun and harmless way to make a case for some Pokemon maybe fitting just a little bit better elsewhere with their typings. So with that said, why don't we go ahead and get into it? Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start with the Pokemon that really incited this idea for me, and that's Blastoise. While Blastoise is just fine as a pure water type, I firmly believe that it should have received the steel type as well somewhere along the line. First and foremost, it's literally got giant metal cannons sticking out of its back, so if that's not steel type, I don't really know what is. Secondly, it's also a turtle, or tortoise if you want to be technical, which are all about defense with their shells, which is the hallmark of the steel type. Now, obviously this isn't really reason enough to give it the steel type, but it is extremely fitting nevertheless. Third, Blastoise's counterparts Venusaur and Charizard both have secondary types, with poison and flying respectively, leaving Blastoise all alone as the only monotype in that group, so giving it the steel type could even up the balance of the Kanto starters in that respect, giving us just one more reason why this should absolutely be a thing. I mean, they could have even given it to Mega Blastoise, seeing as how it would only be temporary and it also gets more metal cannons in that form, but no, it just stays pure water. It's probably due to the fact that it is a starter Pokemon that it didn't get retyped when Steel was introduced, but at the same time, the more you think about it, the less sense it makes for Blastoise not to be part Steel. Tackling another one from the Kanto region, as well as Johto and Sinnoh, that I've also been an advocate for a while now, is the Porygon family being electric type, or at least part electric instead of normal. These Pokemon are literally man-made living organisms that are designed to deal with threats in cyberspace, but are classified as the normal type. I don't know what all is going on in the Pokemon world admittedly, but that entire idea is very clearly not normal. Ghost type would honestly be more fitting for these guys than normal in my opinion, but I honestly think that electric is the way to go here. Given that they were created by technology, are made up of technology and programming code, and can enter into cyberspace, which is basically the technology realm, electric makes all of the sense in the world. You could have even given Porygon Z the poison type too, since it got all corrupted, and that would have been a really creative way to introduce that type combination. Although Toxtricity is wonderful too, and we love him as well. Overall, I just do not buy the normal type for these guys at all, seeing as how they're so unique to begin with, and I think if they had been introduced in a later generation, after Game Freak knew what they were doing a little better with the concept of Pokemon, they wouldn't have received this typing. Next up, why don't we take a trip to Unova and look at Shelmet, because this Pokemon absolutely should be part Steel type instead of just pure Bug. If you take a look at the evolution of its rival, Karrablast, it is Bug Steel. And how did it get that way? Oh yeah, by stealing Shelmet's shell. So Shelmet's shell is 100% the reason why Escavalier is part Steel type, yet isn't part Steel itself when it has the same shell. I get that during evolution, Pokemon can grow stronger and whatnot, and that's how they gain types, but but it kinda seems like a slap in the face to Shelmet if I'm being completely honest. If it were part Steel type, it would even help the relationship of it and Karrablast, as Karrablast would evolve into the typing that Shelmet originally had, and then Shelmet, losing its shell, would evolve into the pure bug typing that Karrablast originally had. This is all just a no-brainer, makes perfect sense. Why isn't this already a thing type of thing? That really only the developers of Game Freak can tell us why it's not the case, because from every other angle, at least from where I'm standing, it absolutely should be. Going back to Kanto, because honestly we've got several on this list from here, we have Gyarados, and Gyarados should be a dragon type, or at least part dragon along with water. I can say with a high degree of certainty that this one just comes down to balancing, because otherwise, why would a Pokemon based on a Chinese dragon, whose evolutionary line is based on the legend of the Dragon Gate, where a carp leaping over the Dragon Gate became a dragon, not be dragon? It's even in the Dragon Egg group and is used by Lance, a Dragon Master. I definitely believe that Gyarados was going to be Dragon type at one point, but was stripped of this typing due to the power and rarity that Dragon types are supposed to have, especially in the days of Gen 1, and could have possibly been given Flying type as a replacement. If that is the case, I totally understand, especially for the early days of Pokemon, but it's still a shame seeing as how that would have been amazing. Like, imagine having to deal with Magikarp until like level 40 or 50, and then it evolves and you get a dragon type. Considering it would have only added one more dragon type to the roster as well, I don't think it would have thrown things too out of whack, but alas, it just wasn't meant to be. Speaking of water types, why don't we take a look at a Pokemon from the Galar region that should be part water type, and that's Graplocked and its pre-evolution Clobbopus. Now, I'm sure you guys can see where I'm going with this, as they're both octopi, which are aquatic creatures. That makes a pretty good case on its own, but even if we take a look at where they're getting their fighting type from, which is likely the concept of octopus wrestling that took place in the US in the 1960s, the whole idea of this was wrestling with octopi in the water and bringing them to the surface. Add that to the fact that everywhere you find these Pokemon in Sword and Shield is in or around water, and they're also in the water egg group, and well, you've got a Pokemon that should be water type. There's nothing wrong with its fighting type, as that gives it some uniqueness and does have a legit inspiration, but if I had to guess, I'd say maybe type balancing is once again the culprit here, since as far as I can see, it just doesn't make any sense any other way for these two Pokemon not to be water type. Heading back to Johto for a bit, and technically Kanto and Sinnoh as well, we've got the Blissey family, who should definitely be at least part fairy type. If Pokemon like Clefairy and even Jigglypuff can get the fairy type coming out of Kanto, then Chansey and its family should easily have it too. I mean, visually speaking, they're all extremely similar pink fairy-esque creatures, and Chansey's whole concept revolves around caregiving and healing, and that's a huge trait of fairies, especially in mainstream media. Blissey even has the highest base HP of any Pokemon, a feat that can only be matched by freaking Eternamax Eternatus. Chansey and Blissey are also in the Fairy Egg group for good measure, and heck, if it came down to simply retyping too many normal types to Fairy as to why this didn't happen, I think the Blissey family is more deserving of it than Jigglypuff's line. There's just more inherent fairiness there in my opinion with Blissey comparatively, so overall this is another head scratcher for sure. Okay, now here's one that a lot of people have been asking about for a while, and that's why isn't Golduck part Psychic type? I mean, it can learn several Psychic type moves, it evolves from a Pokemon named Psyduck, it has a gem in its head that symbolizes the third eye, which is a central fixture in the field of psychic abilities, and even its name, Golduck, has the word gold in it, which constantly symbolizes the Psychic type in Pokemon, as we see Sabrina's Marsh badge being named the Gold badge in the original Japanese games. Its psychic powers are even highlighted in the anime, so like, what gives? Well, I hate to sound like a broken record here, but from where I sit, knowing that Psychic was massively overpowered in Gen 1 to begin with, the developers probably did well to omit one more Psychic type from Kanto's lineup, especially one that would have been pretty easily accessible thanks to how common Psyduck is. Even though this is one of the original mistyped Pokemon though, we'll probably never know if it was actually supposed to be Psychic type originally or not. Going from a Pokemon that should have been Psychic type that wasn't to a Pokemon that was Psychic type but was never supposed to be that originally is Lugia. Up to this point, all of the Pokemon I've talked about in this video haven't been the type that they should be based on my own arguments, but Lugia is one that factually was going to be Water type if it weren't for the climate of the Pokemon games at the time of Generation 2's release. According to Shigeki Morimoto in an interview with Nintendo Dream Magazine, he stated that Lugia was given the Psychic type over Water because at the time, Psychic type was a symbol of powerful Pokemon, largely thanks to the unintended overpoweredness of them in the Gen 1 games, and since they wanted Lugia to come across as powerful as a legendary Pokemon, they gave it the Psychic type over Water as it more naturally would have had, along with Flying type since it has wings. In this situation, you can definitely understand where they're coming from, because anyone who was around for the original generation or two of Pokemon knows how powerful Psychic Pokemon were and felt at the time. But since hindsight is 2020, I feel like it would have been better to just go with what Lugia is all about as a Pokemon regardless, which coincidentally would have also lined it up better with Ho-Oh as a Fire Flying type. Lugia is still amazing either way, but it is cool to at least have an official reason as to why this mix-up occurred. Next up is another Johto Pokemon, and that would be Dunsparce and his lack of any ground or flying typing. This is somewhat similar to my take on Porygon, where just looking at Dunsparce you can pretty much tell that it is not in fact normal as its type would suggest, because most of its inspirations come from mythical type creatures that are based out of various folklore, and in general it's just a very peculiar looking creature that I don't think anyone would describe as normal if you were just taking it for what it's worth. Additionally, it also has traits of other types too, like obviously its wings that could help justify a flying type as I said, and even ground type would work since its Pokedex entries talk about how it burrows into the ground using its tail that looks like a drill. Those two features alone represent more of other types in its design than anything that the normal type is doing with Dunsparce in my opinion. And for that matter, it's also a rare Pokemon. Sparse is literally in its name, so how could something so rare be considered normal? Overall, Dunsparce would just be so much more accurately represented having a type other than normal, and it's a tragedy that it hasn't got that proper representation. And finally, the last Pokemon we're going to talk about today is also probably the trickiest to discuss, and that's Celebi. People have long claimed that Celebi should be Fairy type because it's quite truthfully the Onion Fairy. But in all seriousness, it's like the spitting image of what a fairy looks like, so if any Pokemon was going to be Fairy type, it would be this one. But then on the other hand, both of the types that it does have make perfect sense as well. It lives in and is kind of the spirit of the forest, so grass is a no-brainer, and Psychic works too because of its time-traveling capabilities. So yeah, Fairy does deserve to be there as much as anything else, but what type do you replace with it? This makes Celebi a prime example of how some Pokemon could legit have 3 types, but barring that happening someday, I can't technically be mad at the types that it has, even though it could just as easily and rightfully be Fairy type at the same time. And there we have it everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please leave a like because it really helps out, and subscribe if you're new for more Pokemon content all the time. Also, let me know in the comments if you agree with me, or if there's some reason why these Pokemon are the way they are and they're just fine that I actually missed. You can also check out my Pokemon remixes on Spotify and check out my Pokemon Cardinal project if you haven't yet to support the channel further, which is really appreciated, and with all of that being said, I'll be back on Tuesday with another one. So hit that notification bell so you can know as soon as it goes live. Make sure y'all stay safe out there because I care about you, and until the next one, as always, I will smell you guys later.